Good morning to you. I sometimes think when we reach the beginning of a new month, I just think about the people I'm journeying through life with. Um, and I obviously think about my family, but I think about you as a church family. To realize that we are experiencing life together as family, that you are not alone as part of this family. That whatever September or October or November or December brings, we share it together as family. And I love that togetherness, feeling of that, and love experiencing life with you as we get the chance to do that. I do want to welcome you today to our services and the worship time that we've shared in today. It's been a great experience so far. And certainly we want to welcome those joining us on Facebook today, and glad that you're joining in with us, and hope this is a good worship experience for you as well. Today we continue a kind of a series that we step into every once in a while, which is called A Relevant Word, and we try to take a major theme out of one of the books of the Bible and try to share that in a relevant way to our situation today. And the whole thought behind moving through this in this way is to just let us know that the whole book is relevant. Doesn't matter what culture or time frame that we live in, that it's all relevant to you. And so we have moved through the years from Genesis all the way to today. We're in Ezekiel. And I don't think I've ever preached a sermon from Ezekiel in my life, so it's just something that hasn't come up for me, and that's not unusual. There aren't a whole lot of preachers that I know that have preached a lot out of Ezekiel, but there's some great stuff in the book, and I've enjoyed learning a little bit more about Ezekiel this week. So for me, that's been it's been a fun experience, and hopefully it will be something of benefit to you as well today. There's a lot of factors that have influenced my life, some people, some events. From my earliest memories, way back as a child, from as long as I can remember, I've remembered being a part of a church family. From the time I was very young, to be able to be in Bible school classes, to watch my parents, faithful service and attendance modeled for me from the very beginning of life has helped shape the person that I am today, and certainly I am grateful for that. I was thinking this week of some public school teachers that I've had that really meant a lot to me for a variety of reasons. I remember being in the second grade at Kenwood Elementary, and I had a teacher then. Her name was Miss Allman. And she got noticing that I was bringing a little pill bottle of strawberry quick drink with me every day because I don't like white milk. My mom said I stopped drinking it at 7 months, just quit. And I've never liked it since. I've tried to drink white milk, I just can't do it. But Miss Allman noticed that I was bringing this little thing of white, strawberry quick to pour in my milk every day at lunchtime, so I had something to drink. And she got talking to me about it. I remember feeling a little odd about it, but she kept telling me that I could learn to drink milk. So, and she offered me $1 if I could drink, and back then that was a lot of money. Some of you remember that. She offered to give me $1 if sometime during school that I would drink a carton of white milk. And I really tried. I just couldn't do it. So I never got the $1, and I still don't like white milk. But the thing that was so impressive to me at that particular time in my life, I don't remember any adult outside of my family that took that much personal interest in me. When you're a little kid and a grown person that is not your family, spends that much time and with you and is trying to be helpful and all that. I just remember even as a child, even though I could never get the milk down, I was very impressed with her and the interest that she took in me. I had a music teacher at Fairdale High School named Mr. Wilson. Some of you remember Mr. Wilson. He was an incredible singer. I loved hearing him sing. But he was one who I had for choir all the years I was in high school. And he was somebody that taught me to sing parts. He was somebody who got me interested in choral singing. And we went to competitions with Mr. Wilson as a student. And I think a lot of my love for music, choral music, parts, all came from Mr. Wilson. And I thank God for him in my life. I think you could probably do the same. You could go back through your life. Some of you don't have to go very far to find people that were very influential in helping you become the person that you are. And I think it's good to go back to those memories and those people and thank God for those people, because if they did something positive in your life or something positive came out of that experience that has shaped you to be the person you are today, thank God for that. And I think it's a very worthy exercise. I have those people. You have those people. I learned this week, and as well studying Ezekiel, that Ezekiel had those people too. He was God's prophet for a number of years. But there were, in the early phases of Ezekiel's life, there were things that were impressed upon him that affected his ministry and his life moving forward from it. We learn from Ezekiel's book in the very first chapter that he grew up in a family of priests. His dad was a priest, and before that was a priest. And, it was a family of priests. Ezekiel wrote, he said, the word of the Lord came to Ezekiel, the priest, the son of Buzi. And again, at that particular time, whatever your dad was, if you were a son, that's what you did. And just kind of moved on down the line. And so he knew he would be a priest very early in his life, and he watched his dad with that. And that was something that shaped some of his life. But when you read through Ezekiel's book, you begin to realize that there were things that he wrote about that there was an influence there very, very early in his life. When King Josiah was king of Judah, he led a revival in the country. And, they had drifted from God, as you learn in the pattern of the Old Testament. They had drifted from God. Many of the people were worshiping idols and bowing down to them and different things like that. And Hilkiah, who was the high priest that year, found a lost copy of God's words to Moses. It served as a foundational covenant between God and the Jews. And he found this copy that had been lost. He brought it to King Josiah, and together they started a reform movement. They began practicing what the law required of them. They reinstated the worship of God in the temple, and tried to remove the idols in the various places that people had erected them in the city and the surrounding countryside. And it was just a massive revival that got started, and people turning back to God's word. And Ezekiel was, from the time he was born until the time he was about 12 or 13, that was going on in his country. And I think that he couldn't help, as a young child and growing up through those early formative years, to be impacted by the heart of God, the love of God, the word of God. And I think that had a major influence upon his life. Ezekiel was deeply impressed, we know from reading his book, with the elaborate services that were held in God's temple in Jerusalem. And he would have spent many hours assisting the priests in their daily duties in the temple as a priest in training as he was growing up. And you can tell, reading through his prophetic book of 48 chapters, that he had a great love for the ritual and the service in God's temple. We know as well from his writings that he was influenced by another prophet that was contemporary with him, the prophet Jeremiah. And Jeremiah was a very energetic prophet and just had a very powerful ministry. And many wonder, for good reason, if maybe for a time period Ezekiel had been a student of Jeremiah's. And they lived near each other for about 25 years, and so it's not a stretch to think that their lives would have touched, that maybe exactly Ezekiel was a student of Jeremiah's for a time, and some of his writings tend to reflect that influence. But I think another formative thing in Ezekiel's life would have been when God brought judgment for the first time upon his country. That Babylon came in and conquered Jerusalem, and they deported 10,000 Jews and the king to take them to Babylon. It was just something that Babylon did to try to force their will upon people and disrupt the country from which they had come, and they just removed a large portion of people and settled them in other places. And so Ezekiel was a part of this, and it probably happened somewhere in his 20s that all of a sudden another king and an army came in, overthrew the government and conquered them, and then hauled off 10,000 people, the king included, and moved them to somewhere in Babylon. And we know the location. Tel Aviv was the name of the area they were in, near the Kibar River. But can you imagine being a young man and being uprooted from your home? Being taken to a land you didn't know, among a people you didn't know, language you didn't know, nothing was familiar. There was no temple. He was a priest. There was no copy of the law of God that they had. And certainly it was a difficult transition for him that I think impacted him for a long, long time. I want to share just a little bit of some history with you. I realize some of you, history's not your thing. I've tried to summarize it and boil it down the best I could to give you just some background of what was going on that Ezekiel was writing about. What was his context? And so I just want to kind of give you some brief things. Some of you are very familiar with this portion of history. You can read a lot about it at the close of the book of 2 Kings. And it's just it's a very informative reading that some of you would enjoy, others probably not. But Ezekiel was born in King Josiah's 18th year. This was 621 BC. About 100 years previous to this, the northern kingdom, known as Israel at that particular time, had been wandering away from God for a long, long time. And God brought judgment on them. The Syrian army came down, overthrew the northern kingdom, and did the same thing. They took them away. They deported them and scattered the people of the northern kingdom all over. And this had happened 100 years, really, before Ezekiel was born. And of course, King Josiah was involved in this great spiritual reform. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the book of law had been found, and he had jumped in wholeheartedly with the high priest to bring reform, turning to God's word, turning to the heart of God. And God blessed that. And where Judah for a while had been paying tribute to the nation of Assyria, God stopped that. And so that was not something, it was a kind of a God saying, Josiah, you've done great. He kind of took care of the Assyrians for a while. But all of this came to an end. All this good stuff under Josiah came to an end because Josiah, it almost seems like as you read through there that maybe he just got a little too big of a head, that things were going great, God was blessing him, all those kinds of things, and for some reason he went out. The army of Egypt was coming north, and I don't really think they had any business with Judah at all, but Josiah marched out to do battle with the Egyptian army. And it was an ill-advised thing. It was totally unnecessary, but he did so. And during the battle, he was wounded, and he died from his wounds. And so this great revival that had been going on in the land of Judah kind of shortly thereafter came to an end because leadership changed and priorities changed. And so, again, terrible thing happened there. Well, King Josiah's second son, his throne name was Jehoahaz, became king. But after 3 months, he was removed from the throne. The Pharaoh that had marched up with Egypt was still in the area and decided that he didn't like this king in Judah, and so he got rid of him and put his brother on the throne, who probably was a little more loyal to Egypt. You know how political things go. And his throne name was Jehoiakim. Don't you love the names? Well, this loyalty to Babylon, I'm sorry, I've left out a piece here. But anyway, the Babylonian ruler Nebuchadnezzar defeated the Egyptians in battle shortly after this, and King Jehoiakim began as a loyalty to the Babylonian king, but this loyalty only lasted about 3 years because the Babylonians lost a battle on the borders of Egypt, and King Jehoiakim declared that he was independent now. He assumed that they were weak now. He didn't necessarily need to pay tribute, and so he claimed he was no longer loyal to Babylon. Well, Nebuchadnezzar, who was the ruler at that time of Babylon, marched on Jerusalem with all of his army. And King Jehoiakim either died or was assassinated before the Babylonian army got there. And his son, King Jehoiakim, had to face the Babylonian ruler's anger instead of his dad. And Nebuchadnezzar surrounded the whole city of Jerusalem with his army and laid siege to it. In other words, he cut off all food deliveries and the business outside of the city. It all ended. They just controlled the city and they just sat and waited. Well, after 3 months, King Jehoiakim surrendered. And this is when the king and 10,000 Jews that I mentioned earlier, including Ezekiel, were taken to Babylon. The Babylonian leader placed another son of Josiah on Judah's throne. He served under the name Zedekiah. And you might have think after this Babylonian army came in, laid siege to the city for 3 months, the king surrendered, they hauled off 10,000 people. You might think that the people that were still in Jerusalem would think, hey, we need to get our lives right. You know, if we're not going to do something good here, we might end up in the same situation. We need to turn to God and turn away from idols. You think that might happen. But that's not what happened. Instead, they continued to be a rebellious, disobedient people. And they just continued to reason that they were God's favorite people, that they lived in God's city, that God's temple was in their city. And they could pretty much live the way they wanted because God would never allow anything to happen to Jerusalem. And so this is just part of their reasoning and their disobedience. And there were many false prophets who basically said the same thing. And so they found themselves in their wrongdoing and their rebelliousness that they were encouraged by false prophets to continue. Well, encouraged by these prophecies, Zedekiah, who was king, joined forces with some surrounding nations, and he announced that he was no longer going to pay tribute to Babylon. And so Nebuchadnezzar returned again. He quickly moved into Palestine. He laid siege to the city of Jerusalem again. And this time, the siege lasted for 18 months. 18 long months. And this was God's judgment upon Jerusalem, who refused to turn away from their idolatrous ways. And you can imagine as food disappeared and people began eating anything they could find, that terrible things began to happen in the city. It got so bad, and the Bible talks about this, that some women were actually eating their own children. Well, the city finally fell. Zedekiah was captured. His sons were executed as he watched. And then they put out his eyes and took him in chains to Babylon. But a month later, another round of judgment came, and things got even worse. I'm reading from 2 Kings chapter 25, beginning in verse 8. It said, on August 14th of that year, which was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, and an official of the Babylonian king arrived in Jerusalem. He burned down the temple of the Lord, the royal palace, and all the houses of Jerusalem. He destroyed all the important buildings in the city. And then he supervised the entire Babylonian army as they tore down the walls of Jerusalem on every side. The Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, took as exiles the rest of the people who remained in the city, the defectors who had declared their allegiance to the king of Babylon, and the rest of population. But the captain of the guard allowed some of the poorest people to stay behind to care for the vineyards and the fields. From Ezekiel 1:1, we know that Ezekiel was about 30 years old when God called him to this ministry as a prophet. He had been a priest in training. They usually started serving as priests when they turned about 30. But God at that particular time called him not just to be a priest, but to be a prophet of God. And when this call came, Ezekiel had already been in Babylon for 5 years. And during this time, he'd taken a wife. He'd gotten married. He was living a fairly comfortable life in Babylon to be in the state that he was in. But he had been a silent observer of much that was going on around him. The first 7 years of his prophetic ministry was to the Jewish exiles in Babylon. And this was before the fall of Jerusalem. So for 7 years, he was proclaiming God's message to the exiles in Babylon before the fall of Jerusalem. And during this time, he was proclaiming exactly what God was saying. Unless you turn from your sins, Jerusalem's going to fall. And he proclaimed this. And his words are found in the first 24 chapters of the book of Ezekiel. During Nebuchadnezzar's siege around the city of Jerusalem, Ezekiel proclaimed judgment on the country of Judah, but he also proclaimed judgment upon 7 other nations. And God was wanting the people to know that any person that is disobedient to God is going to fall under judgment, whether you're in Judah or you're in any other country. And so in chapters 25 to 32, Ezekiel is giving God's message to 7 other nations that were also coming under judgment. And then following the fall of Jerusalem, Ezekiel proclaimed God's promises of revival, restoration, new hope for the people of God. And these words are found in chapters 33 to 48. So there's just a summary for you and some background to get us where we are today. I want to share 3 points today from a chapter in Ezekiel that I think you're going to find that's familiar to you, but it's one that has a great message that is very relevant. And the first point I want to talk to you about today is that God knows when our hope is gone. God knows when our hope is gone. You know, as Ezekiel was speaking to God's people in Babylon about revival, about restoration, about new hope, you know, the city of Jerusalem's fallen, it's been burned, the walls have been broken down. I mean, Ezekiel was told by God to begin proclaiming this message of revival, restoration, new hope for the future. And his words were met by the people of Judah with great skepticism, because to them, their faith was over. It had been destroyed. The temple was gone. They were convinced that their broken nation that had been spread all over Babylon and who all over would never be together again, their hope was completely shattered. They were a soundly defeated people, and all this message of revival, new hope, and all that stuff just washed right over them. They just couldn't believe it's true. They didn't see how it could be possible. And so to show the Israelites and us the power of God when hope is gone, God gives Ezekiel a vision of his power and sovereignty. We pick up this in Ezekiel 37, beginning in verse 1. He writes, "The hand of the Lord was upon me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. He led me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. He asked me, 'Son of man, can these bones live?' I said, 'O sovereign Lord, you alone know.' Then he said to me, 'Prophesy to these bones, and say to them, dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you, and make flesh come upon you, and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life. Then you will know I am the Lord.'" You know, thanks to an old African-American spiritual, Ezekiel's vision of dry bones is probably the most well-known passage in the whole book of Ezekiel. Most people, if you ask them about Ezekiel, they don't know a whole lot about the book, but they've probably heard about the Valley of Dry Bones, okay? Mostly because of the song. And it's a catchy song, and you probably sung it as I have too along the way, and it's a neat song to sing. But Ezekiel was carried away in the Spirit in a vision. In other words, he was mentally taken to the middle of a valley that was covered with the bones of dead men. And this wasn't some foggy dream like you and I have, you know, when you wake up and you know, those ones you really don't remember much from them and you don't know what the meaning was and you're not sure how to interpret them. It wasn't one of those kind of things. This was a vision. This was God mentally taking him to a valley that was just filled with the bones of dead men. And the vast number of bones on the floor, as Ezekiel writes this, really impressed him. There was a lot of them. He was amazed at the number of them. And that he was also amazed that they were very dry. They had been exposed, in other words, to the elements for a long time. All of the flesh had rotted and decayed off of these bones. The bones had been exposed to the elements. There had been sun. They had been bleached. They had been there for a long, long time. They were very dry. There was absolutely no life here at all. And I just wonder, I didn't look this up, I just thought of it this morning. Maybe this is where the expression dry as a bone came from. I really don't know. I'm going to have to look that up later. But you know, to heighten Ezekiel's interest, God asked him a question. He said, "Can these bones live?" And from a human standpoint, no, absolutely not. This is a picture of devastation, death, life long gone, no hope of a return. But Ezekiel knew that God could make them live. And God announced that this was what he was going to do, and Ezekiel needed to proclaim it. And this miraculous mass resurrection would underscore that there is nothing outside of God's power to make it happen. That just comes through in bold capital letters. Because God knew how low the Israelite people were. He knew how shattered their hope was. He knew how lost, hopeless they were. They couldn't have been any lower. But you know, God doesn't just know that about the Israelites. God knows that when we've lost our hope. He knows those times in your life and my life when we feel like it's hopeless. Whatever it is, God knows when those times come to you and me. Because no matter how low you are, no matter how hopeless your situation, no matter how long that dark cloud has taken residence over you, God knows in God's Word is there's always hope with me. When our hope supply has gone dry, He not only understands, He can do something about lost hope. Secondly, today, God can put us and our hope back together again. Ezekiel did just as he was told. As he prophesied, he began to hear a sound, and then he heard a commotion, and then a shaking erupted all over that valley as those bones began to come together. Verse 7, he said, "So I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling sound, and the bones came together, bone to bone. I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them. But there was no breath in them." I don't know about you, but when I read a passage like this, sometimes the hair stands up on the back of my neck. I can just begin to imagine saying these words, and all of a sudden all this rattling, clicking noise of all these bones just began coming together and reconstituting themselves into whole skeletons. And then, as you continue to watch, flesh began to appear on those skeletons. Only God can do this. He can put disjointed skeletons back together. And then He created organs, muscles, blood vessels, nerves, skin, hair to cover these skeletons. This is beyond amazing. But this is God. You know, as I was reading this, I was thinking, are there things in your life that are or seem broken beyond repair? You know, I know me. I'm just a broken person in sin, and if it were not for Jesus, I would have no eternal life. I'd have no forgiveness, and it does me good to think about that every day. But God knows how to put you and your life back together. And maybe there's some things in your life that are broken. Maybe there's some things in your life that seem hopeless. But God knows how to put you and your life back together. But I think it's important to realize that when God does this, life may not look the same as it did before. When God puts us back together, life might not look the same. You know, we really don't know if these remade bodies, as God put them back together, look the same as they did before. I mean, God could do that. He could take all these skeletons that were laying all over this floor and put them all together, and they would look just like the original people that died in the first place in that valley. But you know, He's not limited to that. He could have made them quite different. It's God. He can do what He wants. So when God puts us back together, that long, slow process when we turn to Him and He puts life together, it might not look the same as it did before. But that's okay, because we're so grateful that He's doing that in our lives, and we can trust Him to do what is best and what will bring Him honor. Thirdly, God alone gives life. God alone gives life. Again, Ezekiel was told to prophesy, this time to the breath or spirit. Verse 9. Then He said to me, prophesy to the breath. Prophesy, Son of man, and say to it, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe into these slain that they may live. And so I prophesied as He commanded me. And breath entered them. They came to life and stood upon their feet, a vast army. Wow. Don't you just love this? Just the power of God here just knocks me down. You know, bodies need breath to live. The word breath is used 7 times in these 10 verses that we're using for a text today. And the Hebrew word for breath can also be translated wind or spirit or even air. Do you remember the creation account when God created human beings? And it says there in that text, God breathed into their nostrils the breath of life. God alone can do that. God gives the breath. He gives life. There's no life without breath. And even all these bodies had been reconstituted and flesh had covered them and they were there. There was no life there yet until God breathed into them. They needed God's breath to live. And we still do today. We are so grateful for the ability to breathe, to have air to breathe. You know, that God created this earth and the way that it is so that we could breathe the air that's here and live. God gives us physical breath, and that's a great thing. But He also brings spiritual breath, and that's through His Spirit. That we can't have new life in God except through Jesus Christ. And so all that comes together when we identify with God's Son, Jesus Christ, and we become a follower of His, and we receive His Spirit, and we live a life that we could not live before. 1 John 5:12 says, whoever has the Son has life. Whoever does not have God's Son does not have life. We have life only through what He gives us. And that's for eternity. And He does it only through His Son. Let's pray today. Thank you, Father, for the book of Ezekiel. There's so much in this book. But Father, we thank You for a chance just to learn a little bit more about this servant of Yours who lived so many years ago, was so faithful to his call for many, many years. And Father, we thank You for the words that he shared that were so important to the people who lived during his time, as he faithfully proclaimed difficult words to share, but he did so anyway because he loved You and You were most important to him. He suffered greatly, but Father, he was faithful. And we thank You, Father, for this vision that he received and just the message behind that, to know the type of God You are. And Father, we just thank You for this message today. May You add to the preaching and reading of Your word today as Your Spirit desires. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. Ezekiel certainly brought a great message about God's holiness and God's sovereignty. God is over all. And certainly he very clearly speaks in this book that we can't fool God. That if we live contrary to God's law and His will, then judgment will come. There will be punishment. And that was true not only for the people of his time, but that is true for every person since then. That God isn't fooled by anything we do or think. God knows exactly who is His and who is not. And God will one day render judgment. He's a holy and just God. But Ezekiel winds up his book after he spent a lot of time talking about judgment, using the last part of his book to talk about the heart of God to restore, to renew, to bring new life. That Ezekiel was giving a message to put out before the people of that time that God wanted to restore, God wanted to heal, God wanted to renew, God wanted revival. He wanted people to return to Him. That's His heart. And that's exactly what He offered to them. And Ezekiel's prophecy in those chapters pointed not just to Israel's return to Palestine, but it also pointed to a greater renewal with the true shepherd that we find in the pages of the New Testament. Ezekiel foreshadowed a time when God's heart to restore would be fully realized through the ministry of Jesus Christ. And certainly today, if you would like to speak to someone about a personal relationship with Jesus and how to enter that in alignment with the New Testament, or to know more about His church and what it means to be a part of His church, we'd be more than happy to talk to you today about that. Today, if you're going through a tough time, maybe you just need somebody to pray with you, to encourage you, to listen to you. And we're happy to do that today as well. I think it's interesting that Ezekiel's name means God strengthens. God strengthens. And God is ever wanting to do that for His people. So if today we can help in any way with that, please come to one of us and share with us during this next song or after the service. We'll be happy to spend as much time with you as is needed. Would you please stand with us and sing?